For centuries, they stood as silent stone witnesses to their own slow demise. Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, megacities of the jungle, home to millions, centers of science, art, and relentless political power. Then, around the 9th century AD, the buildings stopped. The intricate carvings fell silent. The populace simply disappeared. This is the great enigma of the classic Maya collapse. The Maya were masters of time. Their calendar was a triumph of astronomical precision, far surpassing that of contemporary Europe. They recorded their kings' every triumph, every birth, and every sacrificial ceremony on monumental stone slabs called stelae. But the stelae, the very voice of the kings, fell silent. The last known date inscription in the central lowlands dates to around 909 AD. A 500-year golden age, gone in a generation. To understand the collapse, we must first appreciate the scale of their achievement. This was not a primitive collection of tribes. The Maya civilization, spanning what is now modern-day Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras, was a network of highly sophisticated, independent city-states, fiercely competitive, yet bound by shared culture, religion, and trade. Their cities rivaled medieval European capitals in size and complexity. They engineered systems to sustain populations of up to 100,000 in a difficult environment. They created vast reservoirs to capture and store precious rainwater during the dry season. They built massive reservoirs and terraced hillsides for agriculture. Yet the same environment they so brilliantly engineered their way around was ultimately the executioner of their political system. For decades, theories ranged from the sensational to the simplistic. Invading foreigners sweeping in from the Gulf? A sudden unknown epidemic disease? Perhaps the most popular and most easily dismissed, a sudden visit from extraterrestrial life. None of these theories hold up to archaeological scrutiny. The evidence we have points not to a singular dramatic event, but to a slow, agonizing feedback loop of self-inflicted wounds. Modern science, combining archaeology with paleoclimatology, the study of ancient climates, reveals a far more compelling and relevant narrative. The classic Maya collapse was not one single event, but a staggered regional crisis that unfolded over a century, beginning in the western lowlands and spreading relentlessly eastward and northward. It was a failure of resilience, amplified by the very success of their population growth. The first and most critical vulnerability lay in their dependence on water. The central Maya lowlands lacked major rivers. Their survival hinged entirely on seasonal rainfall and the intricate network of cisterns and reservoirs built to capture it. When the rains came, life thrived. When they didn't, the entire system entered a state of life or death stress. The kings, seen as divine mediators, promised rain. But when the rains failed, the faith in the divine rulers evaporated. Enter the paleoclimatologists, scientists drilling into the mud at the bottom of ancient lakes such as Lake Chichancanab and the Cariaco Basin discovered something profound. Layers of gypsum and other isotopes provide a precise, undeniable record of rainfall. The data shows that the terminal classic period, the time of the collapse, coincided perfectly with a series of prolonged, severe droughts. These weren't just bad years, these were mega-droughts lasting for decades. The climate data is staggering. One study showed a 40 to 50% decrease in annual rainfall during the critical period between 800 and 1000 AD. Imagine living in a tropical jungle that suddenly becomes a semi-desert. Maize, the staple crop and the literal bedrock of the Maya diet, failed catastrophically. The stored water in the reservoirs rapidly depleted. The vast, densely packed cities were now death traps. This was a challenge unprecedented in Maya history. Their entire hydraulic infrastructure, a masterpiece of ancient engineering, was designed for seasonal variation, not for a decades-long drought. The kings, having invested immense resources and political capital into these water systems, watched their greatest achievements turn into symbols of their failure. The stage was set for social upheaval and the unraveling of the political fabric. The Maya were not merely victims of climate change. They were participants in their own ecological crisis. To feed the rapidly expanding urban populations, estimated to have peaked at over 10 million across the lowlands, they needed land. This necessitated widespread deforestation. They cleared forests to expand farmland and to produce the massive amounts of lime plaster needed for their temples and cities. This was a deadly feedback loop. Deforestation reduced the land's ability to retain what little rainfall there was. Less tree cover meant higher ground temperatures and less moisture released back into the atmosphere, which may have intensified the existing droughts. It also led to massive soil erosion, washing away the thin topsoil and severely reducing the yield of their already stressed maize fields. As the environment soured, so did the political climate. The drought was not a unifying force, it was a catalyst for conflict. Archaeological records show a sharp escalation in warfare during the Terminal Classic. This was no longer ritual warfare aimed at capturing elite individuals for sacrifice. This was a brutal, all-out struggle for the remaining viable farmlands, water sources, and trade routes. Cities that had once been open and focused on the splendor of their temples now fortified themselves. Researchers have found evidence of new defensive structures, walls, and even palisades built hastily around city centers. The internal pressure from the failing environment was externalized into relentless, devastating conflict between rival city-states, accelerating the breakdown of regional stability. The core of Maya society rested on a delicate social contract. The divine king, the Ahau, acted as the intermediary between the people and the gods. In exchange for the people's labor, tribute, and unwavering faith, the king guaranteed the cosmic order, most crucially, the rain and the bounty of the harvest. The stelae, their very purpose, was to legitimize this rule and broadcast the king's power. When the droughts arrived and persisted, the contract was irrevocably broken. The most powerful magic and the most elaborate sacrifices failed to bring the rain. The people watched their children starve while the elite maintained their high consumption of resources. The king, once a god, became a scapegoat. The sudden halt of stela erection is not just a loss of tradition, it is a profound political statement. The king's authority was no longer believed or even tolerated. The result was internal political breakdown. In some cities, there is evidence of peasant revolts, with elite palaces and ritual centers being intentionally destroyed or defaced. The common people, facing starvation, made a pragmatic decision. Why stay in the resource-intensive, densely populated urban centers that demanded tribute but provided no safety? The urban hierarchy collapsed from the bottom up. This demographic shift is crucial. The Maya didn't disappear, they migrated. The central lowlands, the former heartland, saw a population decline estimated at up to 90% in some areas. But this mass outmigration was largely directed north, towards the Yucatan Peninsula, where the ecology was slightly different and the collapse was less severe. New centers of power, like Chichen Itza, rose to prominence, though in a different political and cultural form. The northern cities, which had better access to coastal trade routes and a slightly more resilient water supply, such as cenotes, natural sinkholes, initially weathered the storm better. The new power structures were often less focused on the divine Ahau and more on a council of elite families, perhaps learning from the fatal centralization of the South. But even these northern centers, centuries later, would face their own collapse. The legacy of the collapse underscores a critical truth about human environment systems. The Maya were not overthrown by a greater power, they were overburdened by their own success. Their massive population, their resource-intensive architecture, and their inflexible political structure made them acutely vulnerable to the one thing they couldn't control: the long-term, devastating shift in their climate. Their story serves as a cautionary tale of hubris versus reality. To fully grasp the tragedy, we must look beyond the macro factors to the everyday reality of the abandonment. Imagine the fear, a gradual loss of hope, not a sudden attack. One day, the priests are offering blood sacrifices. The next, the storehouses are empty, the reservoir is mud, and the distant city of your sworn rival is closing its gates. The sophisticated trade networks, which had brought goods like obsidian and jade across the lowlands, simply withered and died. The economic collapse preceded the political one. The vast, interconnected economy of the central lowlands fragmented into localized, self-sufficient communities. With no central authority to enforce standardized trade or protect vital routes, the high cost of maintaining specialized crafts and long-distance commerce became prohibitive. The artisan class, the merchants, and the bureaucratic elites, all dependent on this system, were the first to suffer an irreversible decline. Archaeological evidence from the terminal Classic period paints a grim picture. We see a noticeable decline in the quality of art, ceramics, and architecture. The intricate details of the earlier Classic period are replaced by simpler, sometimes hastily finished work. This is a clear indicator of societal stress. The resources and the specialized skilled labor once dedicated to monumental art were now redirected entirely towards survival. Art and ritual gave way to simple pragmatism. The human cost was immense. Analysis of skeletal remains from the period shows clear signs of malnutrition, especially in children, indicating severe and prolonged food stress. This increased vulnerability to disease. The combination of famine, mass migration, and concentrated populations within collapsing urban centers created the perfect environment for outbreaks, though plague was the consequence, not the initial cause of the political fall. Crucially, the collapse was political and institutional, not cultural. The Maya people endured. The language, the religion, and the fundamental worldview adapted. The civilization simply reconfigured itself into a decentralized, smaller, and less resource-intensive form. The grandeur of the kings was replaced by the resilience of the communities who survived in the hinterlands and established new, less fragile capitals in the north. Even the successor states were not immune to the same fundamental vulnerabilities. In the north, Mayapan flourished for centuries, only to face its own eventual political collapse shortly before the arrival of the Spanish. Again, the archaeological record suggests that a series of long-term droughts led to heightened civil conflict, elite rivalry, and eventual institutional failure. The environmental ghost of the South returned to haunt the North. To this day, the descendants of the ancient Maya, millions strong, live throughout the region, speaking their ancestral languages and honoring their culture. Their survival is a testament to the incredible human capacity for adaptation. They abandoned the unsustainable political system, but they never abandoned their identity or their land. Their history is one of resilience against environmental trauma. Why does this 1,200-year-old mystery matter to us today? Because the story of the Maya is a microcosm of global systemic risk. It teaches us that a single, powerful factor, such as long-term climate change, can expose pre-existing vulnerabilities: overpopulation, resource depletion, inflexible political systems, and elite competition. They built a civilization based on the assumption of stability, assuming the rain would always come. When the climate abruptly changed, their systems lacked the necessary flexibility to pivot. As we, in the 21st century, face unprecedented global heating, the Maya stand as history's loudest warning. The greatest threat is not a sudden asteroid, but a gradual, relentless erosion of the natural stability that underpins our civilization. The great stone cities remain, monuments not just to their brilliance, but to their failure to heed the warnings of their environment. The Maya didn't disappear. Their kings lost the mandate of heaven, and their people made the choice to walk away. The story of the Maya collapse is the ultimate cautionary tale, a reminder that the health of our political world is inseparable from the health of the natural world. If you found this deep dive valuable, hit the like button, subscribe to Global History Tales, and tell us in the comments what other ancient civilization we should investigate next.